will definitely improve.
Thank you for letting me unmute. Can you all hear me?
Hello, yes, hi.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. I think the slides and the recording together will be helpful because if it's just the recording, people might not have a good sense of, what exactly you're referring to. So that's great. Thank you all. And I assume that it will, there are a number of people who are out of town, or otherwise engaged, but there will be people here.
Yes, I'll mention that when we begin. Thank you, Mayor Nash.
And thank you very much for all your help.
Absolutely.
People typically get here a few minutes late. It's like Zoom anywhere.
All right. We'll look to get started, and I'll be sharing subtitles as well. So thank you all for joining us for tonight's meeting regarding the Alameda Dallas Pulgas and the Parrott Drive final striping improvements at the intersection. So this is a Zoom meeting where public works staff will look to update you as to the final design at the intersection level. So my name is Sang. I'm an associate engineer in traffic, and I'll be just kind of presenting on tonight's design as well as some other topics for tonight. And I'm also accompanied here by Mike Kato, acting senior engineer for the traffic team. We also have some other city staff present today. Kathleen is kind of just helping in the background, and she'll be assisting us in terms of allowing people to speak up at the end for the Q&A session or the questions and answer session at the end of our presentation. We are also joined by Mayor Nash, so thank you, Mayor Nash, for just kind of helping us get the word out and also just speaking up about the project. Of note is if you're attending tonight, you likely got some of the messaging that we sent out from mailers, and these mailers were sent out to anyone that lives within a quarter-mile radius of the project site, as well as the A-frame messaging that we sent out, that we set up at the intersection to inform folks of this tonight's meeting. Just some general housekeeping items for tonight as well. This is a webinar style meeting, so you'll find that you won't be able to turn on your cameras or mics unless you're prompted to do so by Kathleen. And we do have a survey monkey at the very end, where we'll look for very specific feedback for the design, as well as just an open-ended question for question 4, where you can kind of just give your thoughts as to tonight's meeting or anything prior that you may have had regarding this project. So without further ado, we can move right along to tonight's meeting agenda.
Zhang, can I just say a couple of things?
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Welcome to tonight. I'm here sort of with 2 hats on. One as mayor, because this is obviously a very important intersection in the city of San Mateo. But taking my mayor's hat off, I'm also a Baywood resident. So I've been involved with this project for many years, and I look forward to the presentation. The staff has worked very hard on it. As we all know, it's been a few years between COVID and everything else. So I'm excited that we're going again, and I look forward to everyone giving their opinions. And please afterwards do finish the Survey Monkey, but feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions or comments as well. Thank you, Sang. Back to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much, Mayor Nash. That does remind me, though, Mayor Nash did ask a question on how folks can participate if they were not able to attend tonight's meeting, or if you just want to review tonight's topics that I'll look to actually share about. So we're actually going to have a recording of tonight's meeting agenda posted on our project website, as well as a slide deck available for residents. So without further ado, let's dive right back in. So project background is what I'll be first kind of kicking off the presentation with. We'll start with an overview of the actual project's inception, as well as the project objectives. I'll walk you through just some of the key milestones that we hit along the actual project implementation phases, as well as the actual final design that we'll be discussing later tonight. So through the final striping plan, I'll detail out the improvements we're looking to implement and touch on the expected benefits, particularly over the existing conditions. As for new materials, I'll also be showcasing some of the advantages these materials offer over the existing conditions. And we'll also be showcasing some photos to give folks a general idea of the new aesthetics at the intersection. And finally, we'll be outlining the upcoming timelines that Public Works staff is looking to commit to, an opportunity for feedback from the community. So that will be done via SurveyMonkey. So we'll have a QR code and a website link that you can kind of take a look at. And at the very end, we'll have time for Q&A should there be any additional feedback or questions that come up. All right, so this is the project background, and generally speaking, these will just be reminders for folks that are familiar with the project. For anyone new to the neighborhood or to this project in general, we'll be talking through the project inception through the city's traffic action plan program, the interim conditions or the existing conditions that are out on site right now, as well as how our proposed final design will be kind of changing up what's out there right now. So in 2016, Public Works staff met with several San Mateo communities to draft the traffic action plans, or TAPs for short, for each neighborhood. Each traffic action plan consisted of a list of top 10 traffic concerns to improve the quality of life of each neighborhood, particularly as it relates to traffic-related concerns such as speeding, parking, sight distances coming out of intersections, and general roadway user such as pedestrian and cyclist vehicle safety. In response to the traffic action plan or TAP's priorities, city staff addressed these various concerns by collecting data to both validate the concern and determine best next steps. Several TAPs concerns actually resulted in improvements that you see today to address the aforementioned traffic concerns, one of which is the Alameda de los Pulgas and Parrott Drive intersection improvements project. So this was actually in response to the Baywood neighborhoods TAP priority number 10. So staff implemented what was previously known as phase 1 of the project, or I will continue to reference it throughout this presentation as interim conditions improvements back in August of 2019, with minor modifications to the interim conditions made in March of 2020. Essentially, the specific concern from Baywood residents was regarding the risks when crossing the right turn slip lanes at the intersection due to limited visibility between them and the motorists. The problem was further compounded by speeding vehicles while approaching the slip lanes and erratic driving behavior in the area. Just so everyone is clear on the definition of slip lane, is that this is essentially a roadway feature that allows for road users, particularly vehicular traffic, to change roads without actually entering an intersection or being subjected to the intersection's traffic control. Here we see an aerial of the project site. The north arrow is to the right of your screen, and Alameda de los Pulgas is kind of doing the top left of your screen is Alameda de los Pulgas's north approach, and the bottom left is the south approach for Alameda de los Pulgas. You can see the presence of the right turn slip lanes for all approaches, as was prior mentioned. And this was a photo taken sometime in January of 2018. So the red arrow indicates a potential vehicular path of travel, while the green arrow shows the pedestrian crossing routes. This setup creates potential conflict points between vehicles and pedestrians, which was something that we were looking to address as a response to Awood Neighborhood's number 10 TAP concern. In the current or interim project conditions, we have closed off the right turn slip lanes by way of striping and delineators since August of 2019. This measure was taken to improve upon the pedestrian safety as a direct response to number 10 TAP's concern. To reiterate, this has been an interim solution, and we are now looking to construct final improvements at the intersection to enhance design intent, safety, and aesthetics for the community. Here we see an image taken facing the intersection from the south approach or traveling northbound direction of travel on Alameda. This is essentially what the intersection looks like now, with minor changes that have been made to delineator heights in mid-2020. One of the things we are addressing in final design is the reduction of the overall number of delineators used for these right turn slip lane closures. Lastly, and before we jump into final design, I'll also look to briefly discuss some of the pedestrian-related data that was taken at the intersection pre and post interim project. The image shows two bar graphs comparing pedestrian intersection volumes during the morning peak hours on two different dates. On the left, or January 30 of 2018, without the interim project, the pedestrian volume was 39. However, on the right, on November 19th of 2019, with the interim project in place, the volume increased to 60. This significant increase in pedestrian volumes generally suggests that the project had succeeded at improving the pedestrian experience at the intersection. Moving on to project final design. So firstly, and to be explicitly clear, staff intends to keep the slip lanes at the intersection permanently closed as a part of the final implementation efforts. I will be speaking to the closure type, boxed in red, and actual materials being used later on in this presentation. And just so we're clear, the slip lanes are actually boxed in the four corners in these red boxes as shown on your screens. Secondly, I'll also be talking about the new lane configurations as well as new pavement markings that will be seeing some change as a part of this project. Also shown in red boxes on your screen as well. So with that, let's dive right into the specific changes that we'll be seeing as a part of the final redesign efforts at Parrott, Alameda de los Pulgas. I provided in the next few slides blow-ups or zoomed-in shots of each approach, accompanied by text that highlights some of the new versus existing features at each of the approaches. The orientation of the image is the same as the prior slides, with Alameda de los Pulgas going left to right on your screen, and Parrott Drive going up and down your screens. One important thing to highlight here is the new striping and markings of the westbound Parrott Drive approach. We decided to go with this design to better accommodate Samtrans northbound right turning movements, as in the current condition, we actually have a keep clear box that we are doing away with entirely to better accommodate the northbound right turning movements for the bus. So here we see an aerial of the existing conditions overlaid onto our final plan. And here we see the Samtrans turning movement being made. Turning movement analysis or swept path analysis was performed to satisfy the standard Samtrans design vehicle for this receiving lane. For pedestrian level striping, which you can see I box in red here, we're using a two-stage MMA or methyl methacrylate coating that is slip resistant and suitable for this application. From a maintenance standpoint, it is relatively easy to apply and quite durable. especially considering that we will have no vehicular traffic on the MMA striping. As attendees of tonight's meeting, as well as for anyone just kind of watching over this video from a recording, we have included a question in the SurveyMonkey at the end of this presentation to gather some feedback about this style of striping and to see if the community desires something more standard, such as yellow crosshatch striping. I will have photos of these applications later on in this presentation. Moving on, we also have some desired footprint markings to inform users that crossing to get onto the corner islands is allowed at any time. Although it's important to note that this is not part of the accessible path of travel. Lastly, no crosswalk refreshes will be included as a part of this work. Regarding the permanent closure of the right turn slip lanes, we're planning to remove and replace the existing 18-inch height delineators that was installed as a part of the interim project. With this project, we will install a combination of low-profile rubber curbs and 18-inch height delineators. The overall number of delineators will actually be reduced because the rubber curbs will assist with informing road users of the slip lane closures. As mentioned before, we have new striping and pavement markings that is a part of this project. Currently, the Alameda approaches do not have lane use arrows that specifically inform users of the permitted movements. Here's a snapshot of the west approach on Parrott Drive. So I'll just sit here for a little bit and have folks just kind of digest what's on your screens. And finally, we find ourselves on the north approach, or southbound direction of travel on Alameda de los Pulgas. As mentioned before, we have new keep clear markings at the Columbia Drive approach that we are installing in response to a request made by residents in March of 2020. For the north approach, we also have new striping and pavement markings that inform users of the permitted movements on Alameda. Of note that we are actually looking to reintroduce the outer or number 2 southbound share through right lane at this approach. Before the interim project, the intersection actually had 2 southbound lanes. The interim project reduced the southbound approach to 1 lane, as in this overlaid image, and the final design seeks to change it back to 2 southbound lanes. The aerial overlaid shows the existing conditions where this lane is cross-hatched over. And just for your viewing pleasure, I've included a final shot without the aerial. Moving on to new materials at the for the right turn slip lane closures. Here we have the more of a diagram of the surface mounted flexible posts. And this is a photo of what will look very similar to our actual implemented project. And this will actually be used in combination with the low profile rubber curbs, otherwise known as lane separators. So I talked about how we will look to reduce the overall number of delineators by combining these 2 materials. So overall, there's roughly a 40% reduction in number of delineators by being able to combine these 2 materials for the right turn slip lane closures. For the pedestrian level striping, I have shown some photos on your screens for the different styles that we're potentially considering as a part of this project. On the left of the double yellow lines is the MMA or methyl methacrylate style striping. And on the right is the more standard crosshatch style striping. In the next few slides, I'll just provide some more zoomed in shots so you can kind of see the color and different applications for the MMA, as well as our more standard crosshatch style marking. So in the SurveyMonkey link, you'll be seeing question number 3 that kind of poses attendees of tonight's meeting, as well as the recorded meeting for this question. So please look to participate and just weigh in on which style you would prefer for our final striping improvements here. In terms of next steps here, I'm also toggling off the subtitles as we have some QR codes. And I just wanted to give everyone just a quick update on our timeline for the Parrott Alameda intersection project. We'll be incorporating community feedback from tonight's meeting, as well as keep the SurveyMonkey link open for a few weeks. For anyone who has watched tonight's meeting or attended tonight's meeting or watched the recording. Later that same month in September, we'll be soliciting contractor quotes for the work to be done at the intersection. And then in 2024 for November, we'll be looking to kick off construction, weather permitting. So if you want to take out your phones and just kind of use your scanner or your camera app to scan the app and access the SurveyMonkey website, that'd be much appreciated. And I still have the SurveyMonkey QR code up on your screens. But I did want to also address the planter box scope of this project. So you may recall from past communications held regarding this project that there was discussion of us as in Public Works Department, including planter boxes as a part of the slip lane closures. Staff decided to move forward with this design instead, as the planter box scope came with constraints such as budget and ongoing maintenance elements. This was hindering the overall project timeline, which is why we decided to split the scope for the Parrott Alameda project. The planter scope is pending internal discussion. We'd like to use this time to gather feedback from the community about this particular design element to see if it's still something that the Baywood residents still desire. As for the actual planter box design, if you happen to downtown San Mateo, more recently, you likely have noticed our planter boxes on 1st, 2nd, and 2nd, 3rd Avenue Ped Mall closures as a part of the B Street Ped Mall implementation. In staying consistent with this design, this would likely be the only style that we would consider for a potential later implementation for this intersection. So here we have the QR code again, and on the left is actually the SurveyMonkey question that you would see on regarding the planter boxes implementation for this project. So thank you for attending. Please feel free to reach out. My contact Sang is on your screen, extension 7348. Mike Kato is as well. And the QR code for the SurveyMonkey we'll look to keep on our screens. So thank you. And we can open it up to questions. I did have actually one email question that did come in, so I can look to address this real quick. And I believe this was forwarded from Mayor Nash. So what is being done, just reading it out verbatim, what is being done to allow right turn on red or while others are waiting to go straight / turn left? This is one of the more used intersections, and yet because of the changes, it is down to 1 lane and no opportunity to turn right if there's anyone waiting ahead. Think about every other intersection off and onto Alameda. There is an option or second lane to turn right while other cars are waiting. This needs to be readdressed in the redesign. I can look to answer this question, and Mike, if you have anything to add, feel free to chime in. And so this question, I'm assuming, kind of addresses the single lanes for departing and receiving on Parrott Drive for the west and east approaches at the intersection. It does kind of touch on some of the city's efforts to restrict right turn on red entirely, but I'll start off by being more project specific. So the question implies that in the original or pre-project conditions, there used to be 2 approach lanes and 2 receiving lanes for both the westbound and eastbound approaches, although these lanes were actually not explicitly marked. It is likely that it was being used as a shared through right lane to make the right turn on red maneuver, as the party implies, or the party mentions. The final design at the intersection is not proposing to reopen these outer lanes for both of the Parrott Drive approaches for a few reasons as follows. Firstly, staff understands that there may be some minor delays experienced by vehicle users looking to make a eastbound right or a westbound right turn from Parrott Drive. But the interim project has not negatively impacted intersection operations in any measurable way. And might I remind folks that we are actually looking to reintroduce the outer southbound through lane on Alameda. Secondly, design intent here actually understands that there is some trade-off for the right turning vehicles from Parrott having to wait at the red light, but protecting pedestrians for as long as possible with the final design intent is a benefit that staff believes outweighs this inconvenience. Lastly, and folks may just be generally aware of this from local news, but other agencies such as Berkeley and SF have adopted right turn on red restrictions citywide to address pedestrian safety issues in pursuit of vision zero. To be clear, we're not restricting right turn on reds here at this particular intersection, but this design intent with respect to making the intersection more compact and also keeping 1 approach lane and 1 receiving lane for east and west approaches is likely here to stay as we address safety locally by projects such as this, and programmatically as we consider specific right turn on red restrictions.
Thank you, Sang. I think it's my turn to add another question. And thank you for answering that other one. There are a number of people who have asked me about the planter boxes. Number one, if there are planter boxes, they won't have that big no commercial loading zone sign on them, right? That's just because it's downtown?
Yes, most likely. And yeah, that's likely the signs that you're speaking to is just the signs that are facing, I believe, like First
Right.
Avenue and Second Avenue. Yeah. So likely those signs will not be placed out there. But we technically haven't fleshed out the design of that.
Sure.
So there might be some other kind of signage, potentially like object marker signage that notify folks of the vertical elements of the design. But I don't expect there to be the same kind of signage that we see on B Street today.
Okay, thank you for that. Secondly, as I understand, the plantings that would happen in the planter boxes would be succulents and native plants similar to what we're seeing downtown and what we've been trying to introduce in the Baywood Islands. I'm assuming that's correct as well, not, geraniums and more traditional things. We're looking for things that are native, would require less water and be more sustainable.
That's correct. I believe the plantings will be very similar to what we have on the Ped Mall implementation.
Okay.
But
And
I
then
believe,
go ahead,
Parks and
Rob.
Rec was kind of involved with that. So
Sure, sure. And they would be very involved, but that's what I've understood. And I guess one question, I'm sure you probably can't answer it tonight, but to bring back is there's been a lot of discussion about in the area that is now cordoned off because of the delineators and what you're going to be putting in with the rubber curbs, there's a fair amount of space there. And a number of residents have asked me, could we develop some kind of community garden there in those spots? Maybe not all of them are big enough, but some of them, at least a couple of them, are quite large. So that would be something I know a number of people would be interested in exploring that would be protected because of the delineators and the curbs, but might be an interesting way of creating, a mini pocket park.
right. We'll table that feedback. I think we'll just kind of similar to that discussion that we'll have to have with Parks and Rec. I'll also bring it
Sure,
up. And would this
sure.
be something like a raised garden bed style?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah. I think I just wanted to share that, and anyone who's on the line would have that opportunity to think about it. And I did receive a number of people giving me that question because they couldn't be here tonight. So just wanted to get that on the table.
Absolutely.
But thank you. And the delineators, will they remain white?
Yes.
Okay, that's good to know. And the rubber curb, is that black?
Correct. With specific actual markings on them to just give some reflectivity.
Okay.
Yes.
And is there anything that you can give us, given your experience, feedback about the different kinds of, you showed us the sort of solid color versus the red and the white versus the yellow hatching. Any experience of other cities or towns or implementations of these that you could share? I mean, it's a very residential area. So I would think what you're proposing with the solid color would be desirable because it would blend in, but there may be experiences from other towns that might be very interesting to have.
Right. We'll do a little bit more research. The MMA is actually a little bit new. It's largely used in actual bike lanes, and for bike lanes at least, it'd be more of a bike lane green. Obviously, that's not something we're looking to do here. But we'll try and see if some neighboring cities or maybe any agency in California have done something similar. But yes,
Great.
to be fair, Those photos I found online were across the pond over in Europe, I believe. So
Yeah, but they do a lot more of it over in Europe, so that's great learning if we can learn from them.
yeah,
So
I
that's
believe
great.
there's. Thank you, Mayor Nash. I believe there's a lot of questions in the chat.
Okay, I will leave it to the chat now. Thank you.
Let's see. Okay. Sorry. So John Neal asked if, well, I don't know if those are specific questions. There was an anonymous attendee 619 asking, will the city continue to explore funding for a complete redesign of the intersection? Right now, in terms of funding for this specific program, it is sufficient to do what was presented on today. I believe the complete redesign that you're speaking to, where we potentially use concrete entirely to fully delineate off the slip lanes, is a little expensive for the amount of program funding that we have, or project level funding that we have today. So it would be a longer term plan um, if it ever comes to fruition. And then Peter Mandel at 622, can you please clarify the status of the planter boxes? Are they included in the initial construction or are they to be added as part of a future phase? So the planter boxes are a potential longer term phase or longer term implementation. And that would still need to be worked out with the Parks and Recreation Department, as well as internally, whether we would have budget to support the planter boxes. So it would not be a part of this initial striping implementation. Anonymous attendee at 624, we happen to live right near the bus stop. When the bus is stopped, it's parked in front of our house, blocking our driveway and parking out front. Is that stop going to be moved forward with this project? I believe there's two bus stops on the east approach on Parrott Drive, just going off of memory, but I think this anonymous attendee is talking about the new bus stop. But no, we're not looking to move the Samtrans. So Samtrans basically manages and handles the bus stop implementation as well as their sign and post. So that would be something that only Samtrans can really address, I guess. So we are not looking to impact that as a part of this design effort. Yes, Mayor Nash.
I just wanted to say that's true for you, but whoever it is, if you want to contact me about the specifics, I'd be happy to reach out to Samtrans because we're working with them on a couple of other bus stops. So my email, the work email is ldiaznash@cityofsanmateo.org, or just come on down Parrott and find me.
Yeah, hi, it's Mike Cato, also from the city. I want to chime in a little bit about that. I'm not exactly familiar with where the bus stops are and how you're suggesting we might move them. But if you're talking about move them forward, like towards the intersection, because now there's, the slip lanes are closed. I don't want to get your hopes up because the curbs are going to be there with the delineators still. I mean, there's going to be fewer delineators, but there's still going to be delineators there. There will be the low curbs there. I suspect that will be problematic for moving a bus stop into that area. People would have to sort of step over the curbs to get onto the bus. I just don't think that's something that's going to happen. But you can always ask Samtrans and see what they have to say about that.
Thank you for that question. Peter Mandel asked at 624, can you please confirm the ability of Samtrans buses to turn right from northbound Alameda onto Parrott? Have you increased the turning radius from what exists today? Have you moved the center line? What is different from today? So maybe I can actually go all the way back. Or we'll just show this high level aerial. So Peter, for the east approach or the westbound direction of travel on Parrott Drive, we've decided to shift over the center line. You can kind of see I'll show the laser pointer. The center line's been kind of deviates from what's existing out there so that we're doing away with the keep clear box. And this was after we had determined that this satisfies the Samtrans turning movement going northbound, right? So To answer your question, we haven't actually increased the turning radius. Like the intersection geometry is staying exactly the same, but we're moving the center line so that it can accommodate that turning movement. Hopefully that answered your question. Anonymous attendee at 626. The narrow lanes and inability to easily make right turns for both Parrott and Alameda has increased automobile congestion and made the intersection more treacherous for drivers. Far more automobiles use this intersection compared to pedestrians. I presume this project is too far along. Please let us know if there's any way to change course at this point. That's noted. But yes, I mean, it is, the project is too far along and we're looking to implement it. Generally, and I can kind of point back to the actual mail-in survey findings that we mailed in back in March of 2020. We had more than a majority of residents actually support what we did out for the interim project. So we're looking to deliver on this with this final design. Thank you. Peter Mandel, I believe another comment, building onto the mayor's comment, why not build islands like those existing elsewhere in Baywood rather than planters? I believe this was touched on earlier. Yeah, it would just be too costly to implement given the existing projects funding. So potentially a really long-term plan for the intersection, but with what we have right now, this is a very robust implementation where we're actually closing off the slip lanes while improving on the existing aesthetics at the intersection. So thank you for that question. Paul Krupka, with Krupka Consulting asked, you said that pedestrian volumes increased with the pilot. Which movements are reflected in the counts shown? I can kind of take that offline and show you the actual data, but essentially it was for all legs, so all crosswalks. And we chose not to show it for each leg because there'd be a little too much data shown for a meeting such as today. But yes, for the entire intersection, it was just increased. And I believe it would also be for access across Alameda. Anonymous attendee, is it possible to remove pavement to have a ground level planting? There are so many elements, curbs and delineators that the area would look confusing and cluttered. Yeah, I believe Mayor Nash kind of touched on this question earlier. We'll look to just ask this question with Parks and Recreation Department to see if some kind of raised garden bed design is something, or a community garden would be something that they'd be willing to help maintain or even be open to. So that's not totally off the table. Paul Krupka also asked at 634, did you measure collisions before and after the pilot? I am not too familiar with the collision data myself, but I believe that this intersection in particular had a lot of near misses, but not actual severe or fatal collisions between pedestrians and vehicles. Now, if you're asking about vehicles and vehicles colliding, that's something else, but I would suspect that this intersection actually doesn't see too much of that compared to our more compared to other intersections in the city that we're actively working on. So thank you, Paul. I believe that covers it for all the active questions right now. And John, if you had a specific question, I know you asked technically like the first couple questions, but I believe it was just more feedback related. So, but if you have any,
yeah, I think the first question I think I can answer for John, which you know, he mentioned that when you showed the arrows to talk about the conflict between the vehicle and the pedestrian, and you only showed it on one corner, that was just meant to be an example. So yeah, we recognize that that is an issue all the way around, and that's why, you know, the slip lanes are closed on all four corners. Yeah, so that graphic was really just an example, so that sign could describe the problem. And yeah, we recognize it's all the way around the intersection. I think John asked another question about the landscaping, but I think you've basically answered that one. You know, we don't really have the funding to put a lot of landscaping in at this point in time. So that's why the project is the way it is without them, and then maybe with planter boxes in the future. Does Mayor Nash have her hand up
Yeah,
again, or is that from
Right,
before?
no, that's me again.
Okay, please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Mike. Do you have any idea of how long the construction will take once you start in November, provided that there are no major rains? I get all the caveats.
I can answer that real quick and maybe you can chime in. But typically for a project such as this, we just need to make sure once we get a contractor on board, typically working days for something like this wouldn't take over a week. I guess I don't want to promise that on behalf of the contractor and depending on the weather for that month. So it wouldn't take longer than at least a couple of weeks in my
Couple
experience.
weeks.
Yes.
Great. Thank you.
And there's a question from Laurie Hiater. This intersection is a feature of the Baywood Historic District. Did you consult a historian about these modifications? I guess the answer to that question, or directly, I haven't personally, or as a department, we haven't personally consulted historians about these modifications. But I would suspect that there would not be too many issues with this as we have the interim conditions that have been out there for 4 years. And should there be actual historical impact, features like this, the ones that I was talking about during the presentation, they can easily be pulled if necessary. But since this is a roadway within the city's property, I wouldn't think that this would impact any historical regulations that any entity such as that would have. But I can look to actually follow up on that discussion if you so wish.
Sang, I think Kathleen indicated that Peter wants to speak.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Can we unmute him? Oops. Kathleen, I may have muted him after you unmuted him. Can you unmute Peter, please?
Yes, he's been prompted to unmute.
Hello, Peter. We can't hear you if you're trying to speak.
Well,
There,
Peter, oh,
I
yeah.
don't know. Looks like Peter's unmuted now, but I still can't hear him. Maybe I don't know. Is there anybody else that has any questions?
Right. Lori asked a follow-up question. So she just clarified that the concern about the intersection modifications is about the aesthetics. The intersection was designed with aesthetics and safety in mind. So essentially, the original impetus behind this project was because the residents of the Baywood neighborhood were concerned with actually crossing to get into the crossing islands. So a lot of folks weren't actually actively using the intersection as a pedestrian. So this is why, despite there being modifications made, and I know generally the neighborhood might feel different about how our existing conditions looks right now, we're actually looking to improve on that and make sure that there's less delineators while keeping those slip lanes closed. So hopefully that answers your question. But I'll look to follow up on whether we need to consult a historian about looking to keep these changes permanent.
Looks like Peter put something else into the chat. He has one more question. Does the city have a rough estimate of additional cost of constructing a landscaped island versus planter boxes? Did we get did we do a cost estimate like that, Sang?
So I believe Peter's asking about, I'm not sure what a landscape island is. Is that the community garden that perhaps Mayor Nash is speaking to? If so, either way, I don't think we have a cost estimate for that, as opposed to going with planter boxes. But that's something that we can bring up with Parks and Rec in that conversation with them, to see if that's potentially an option that we would consider. And technically speaking, I don't think planter boxes and raised garden beds would be that much different. Just the raised garden beds would be just allowing for folks to, kind of use the space for themselves, versus planter boxes being something that the Parks and Recreation Department would maintain, and water. So
Can I say something?
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so hi, everyone. This is Matt Fabry. I'm the Public Works Director. I've been listening in, and I think, I guess the sense that I'm getting is that when people are talking about landscaping islands, they're talking about, removing asphalt and, replacing it with vegetated areas. And I think the cost of that can be significantly different, because we're talking about, one, removing asphalt, then you have to put in some sort of, potentially concrete, strip to retain the edge of the asphalt, and then put in planting. And if we're going to put in planting, it's going to require, tapping into irrigation, and things like that. So it just becomes a much more expensive project, probably hundreds of thousands of dollars versus tens of thousands of dollars in terms of the cost differential, probably for landscape islands versus or landscape areas versus planter boxes.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks for that. And yeah, I would definitely agree with that. It would be.
And I'll just also add on the planter boxes. I think part of the challenge with the planter boxes is that, they aren't connected to irrigation. I think when we talked to City of San Carlos, who was sort of the inspiration for the planter boxes that you see at the pedestrian mall, that we had heard that they had, potentially come up with a self-watering design, because those planter boxes sit on top of water-filled barriers that, are sort of the ugly orange barriers that you fill with water as traffic control devices, that those boxes sit on top of those and make it look nicer. But our staff, I think, looking into the self-watering features of that, didn't pan out to be as great as it sounded, and maybe not as feasible. And so I think that's our challenge with doing the planter boxes. Is not only is it a cost to, procure and construct those and put the plantings in, but, I think the picture you saw that Sang showed, the ones down at the pedestrian mall, have pretty small, planter inserts that are sitting on top of water-filled barriers that, yeah, that picture there. So those are small, planter boxes that you might see in your window garden or something like that. And those potentially require frequent maintenance in terms of watering. And these aren't going to be connected to irrigation, at least at this point. If we're going to connect it to irrigation, that significantly adds to the cost. But so that's going to require potentially our Parks and Rec department to add to their contract that they have for a vendor that goes around, for example, to some of the planter boxes down in downtown, that they go and water those from a truck. And so those are some of the details that we'll have to figure out in terms of, if we're putting in planter boxes. I think we'd also have to look at, how many planter boxes are we talking about, and where would they be installed? So I think there's more to look at for that. I hear clearly from the comments that people have provided that their, interest is potentially, landscaped areas that are, in-ground landscaped areas versus planter boxes. But we do have, limited resources that we can put towards this. And so we'd have to figure out what the cost implications would be, and whether we could afford to do so.
Thank you, Matt. Peter, hopefully that answered your question.
Lori added one more comment about those corners, just asking that the islands, the neighborhood has islands to make it park-like and to slow traffic, and that these areas should look like the islands in the neighborhood. So again, I think that's all just part of the same conversation, right? Hard for us to do that right now. But certainly something, I think we're getting the message that there's a desire, to figure out a way to make those areas more attractive. And the department is certainly going to keep that in mind.
Yeah. Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Lori, for your comment. All right, if there's no further questions, I think we can look to close out the meeting. So thank you everyone for joining. Obviously, the recording will be up on our website as soon as possible. Thank you, city staff, for assisting. Mayor Nash, I see you have your hand raised.
Sorry,
Yeah.
one more
Absolutely.
question.
Yeah, go ahead.
How long will the survey be up?
Right. Typically for these, I leave them up for 3 to 4 weeks. In the interest of time, I think to deliver on the project, I believe 3 weeks would be appropriate. So I'll specify an actual end date in the project survey. But obviously, for folks tuning in tonight, you can just the survey itself actually only takes like 2 minutes to complete. So
Yeah, I'm just interested in everyone who wasn't able
yes,
to attend
absolutely.
tonight.
So I
Figuring
believe 3
it out
weeks will
and
be more
then-
than enough for most people to check it out.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. And thanks to city staff for doing this. I think this was a good comprehensive presentation, and I hope people will share information in the survey and get back to you or get back to me with any questions and further comments that they've got.
Thank you, Mayor Nash. Thank you, everyone. You have a good night.
Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, everybody, for attending.